The Condor Legion was a unit composed of volunteers from the German Air Force and from the German Army which served with the Nationalists during the Spanish Civil War of July 1936 to March 1939. The Condor Legion developed methods of terror bombing which were used widely in the Second World War shortly afterwards. The bombing of Guernica was the most infamous operation carried out by the Condor Legion. Hugo Sperrle commanded the unit's aircraft formations and Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma commanded the ground element. History of military aid to Spain. Following the military coup in Spain at the start of the Spanish Civil War, the Spanish Second Republic turned to the Soviet Union and France for support, and the Nationalists requested the support of Hitler's Germany and Fascist Italy. The first request for German aircraft was made on July 22, with an order for 10 transport aircraft. Hitler decided to support the Nationalists on 25 or 26 July, but was wary of provoking a Europe-wide war. The Reich Air Travel Ministry concluded that Nationalist forces would need at least 20 Ju-52s, flown by Lufthansa pilots, to carry the Army of Africa from Spanish Morocco to Spain. This mission became known as Operation Magic Fire. The joint Spanish-German-Spanish-Moroccan Transport Company, and an entirely German company, the Raw Materials and Good Purchasing Company were established. This involvement was kept covert, hidden from both foreign and economic ministries, and funded with 3 million Reichsmarks. The organization and recruitment of German volunteers was also kept secret. The first contingent of 86 men left on August 1, unaware of where they were going. They were accompanied with 6 biplane fighters, anti-aircraft guns and about 100 tons of other supplies. They were placed at Tablada Airfield near Seville, and accompanied by German air transport began the airlift to Franco's troops to Spain. Germany's involvement grew in September to encompass the Wehrmacht's other branches. Operation Magic Fire was renamed Operation Guido in November. A wide belief was that the soldiers would train Spanish nationalists, and not engage. The head of the Kriegsmarine provided submarines from October 24. The German Navy also provided various surface ships and coordinated movement of German supplies to Spain. German U-boats were dispatched to Spanish waters under the codename Ursula. In the 2 weeks following July 27, German transport moved nearly 2,500 troops of the Army of Africa to Spain. By October 11, the mission's official end, 13,500 troops, 127 machine guns and 36 field guns had been carried into Spain from Morocco. Over this period there was a movement from training and supply missions of overt combat. The operation leader, Alexander von Schiele, was replaced by Walter Warlimont. In September, 86 tons of bombs, 40 Panzer PZK-PFWI tanks and 122 personnel had been landed in Spain. They were accompanied with 108 aircraft in the July-October period, split between aircraft for the nationalist faction itself and planes for German volunteers in Spain. German air crews supported the nationalist advance on Madrid, and the successful relief of the siege of the Alcazar. Ultimately, this phase of the siege of Madrid would be unsuccessful. Soviet air support for the Republican was growing, particularly through the supply of Polikarpov aircraft. Warlimont appealed to Nazi Germany to step up support. Following German recognition of Franco's government on September 30, German efforts in Spain were reorganized and expanded. The existing command structure was replaced with the Winterer 1/4 Bung Ra 1/4 Gen, and the military units already in Spain were formed into a new legion, which was briefly called the Iron Rations and the Iron Legion before Gar Paragraph Ring renamed it the Condor Legion. The first German Charger copyright d'affaires to Franco's government, General Wilhelm von Thoma, arrived in November, but was told not to interfere in military matters. Motivation equals. In the years following the Spanish Civil War, Hitler gave several possible motives for German involvement. Among these were the distraction it provided from German remilitarization, the prevention of the spread of communism to Western Europe, the creation of a state friendly to Germany to disrupt Britain and France, and the possibilities for economic expansion. Although the offensive on Madrid was abandoned in March 1937, A series of attacks on weaker Republican-controlled areas was supported by Germany. Despite prolonging the Civil War, it would help to distract the other Western powers from Hitler's ambitions in Central Europe. The offensive on Visaya, a mining and industrial center, would help fuel German industry. On June 27, 1937, Hitler declared he supported Franco to gain control of Spanish all. Discussions over German objectives for intervention occurred in January 1937. Germany was keen to avoid prompting a Europe-wide war, which at the time they felt committing further resources to Spain would do. Contradictory views were held by German officials. Ernst von Weizsäcker suggested it was merely a matter of graceful withdrawal. Hermann Gar paragraphing stated that Germany would never recognize a Red Spain. A joint Italiano-Euro-German decision, that the last shipments would be made by the start of February, was agreed. It has been speculated that Hitler used the Spanish Civil War issue to distract Mussolini from Hitler's own designs on and plans for union with Austria. The authoritarian Catholic, anti-Nazi Vorteilscurrency Front government of autonomous Austria had been in alliance with Mussolini, and in 1934 the assassination of Austria's authoritarian president Engelbert Dollfuss had already successfully invoked Italian military assistance in case of a German invasion. A communiqué in December 1936, from German ambassador in Rome Ulrich von Hassel illustrates another point. The role played by the Spanish conflict as regards Italy's relations with France and England could be similar to that of the Abyssinian conflict, bringing out clearly the actual, opposing interests of the powers and thus preventing Italy from being drawn into the net of the Western powers and used for their machinations. All the more clearly will Italy recognize the advisability of confronting the Western powers shoulder to shoulder with Germany. Operational record: the Condor Legion, upon establishment, consisted of the Kampfgruppe 88, with 3 squadrons of Ju-52 bombers and the Jagdtruppe 88 with 3 squadrons of Heinkel He-51 fighters, the Reconnaissance AUFKLA Currency Rungsgruppe 88, an anti-aircraft group, the Flaktier 88, and a signals group, the Nachrichtenartillung 88. Overall command was given to Hugo Sperrle, with Alexander Holl as Chief of Staff. Schill was transferred to become a military attaché copyright in Salamanca. 2 armored units under the command of Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, with 4 tanks each, were also operational. The Nationalists were supported by German and Italian units and materials at the Battle of Madrid. However, the military situation in Madrid remained poor for the Nationalists, and both German and Italian aircraft began bombing raids on the city as a whole. The Germans were keen to observe the effects of civilian bombings and deliberate burning of the city. Offensives involving German aircraft, as well as the bombings, were unsuccessful. Increasing Republican air superiority became apparent, particularly the strength of the Soviet Polikarpov 115 and I-16 aircraft. Historian Hugh Thomas describes their armaments as primitive. Vaupel, in November-December, urged the creation of a single German unit of 15,000 30,000, believing it would be enough to turn the tide of the war to the Nationalists. Hans-Heinrich Dierkopf argued this would be insufficient, and that larger measures could provoke the wrath of the Spanish. Between late 1936 and early 1937, new aircraft were sent to the Condor Legion, including Henschel HS-123 dive bombers, and prototypes of the Heinkel He-112 and Messerschmitt Bf-109, with the latter proving the most successful. The Heinkel He-111 was added to the bomber fleet, along with the Dornier Do-17. Older aircraft were passed on to the Nationalists. By the end of 1936, 7,000 Germans were in Spain. German forces also operated in the Battle of Jarama, which began with a Nationalist offensive on February 6, 1937. It included German-supplied ground forces, including 2 batteries of machine guns, a tank division, and the Condor Legion's anti-aircraft guns. Bombing by both Republican and Nationalist aircraft, including Ju-52s from the Legion, helped ensure a stalemate. It showed up the inadequacy of the Legion's aircraft, faced with superior Soviet-made fighters. Von Thoma requested Irish Nationalist support for a tank advance at one point, never to be replicated. use of E-51 and Ju-52s, and the Legion's anti-aircraft guns used in ground roles, only partly mitigated what was a significant defeat for the Nationalists at the Battle of Guadalajara during March. A joint Italian-German general staff had been set up in January 1937 to advise Franco on war planning. The defeat of a significant Italian force and the growing Soviet superiority in tanks and aircraft led the Germans to support a plan to abandon the offensive on Madrid and instead concentrate a series of attacks on weaker Republican-controlled areas. Whilst many countries believed motorized troops as proved less effective than was first thought, the inadequacy of the Italians as a fighting force was quite apparent to the Germans. The Visayas campaign The isolated area of Visayas, a predominantly Basque part of northern Spain, was the most immediate target, in what was called the War in the North. It was largely a nationalist and Italian offensive, but was supported by a consistently re-equipping Condor Legion. The terrain was favorable, with the plains coming over a range of mountains to the south, masking their entrance. Sperrle remained in Salamanca. Wolfram von Richthofen replaced Hall in January as deputy and in actual command. Since the Basque Air Force was very limited, even fighters were used in ground attack roles. The Legion's Air Force initially attacked the towns of Ochandiano and Durango. Durango had no anti-aircraft defense, and only minor other defenses. According to the Basques, 250 civilians died on the 31st March, including the priest, nuns and congregation of a church ceremony. The Germans, with their air raids, were hated. The Basque ground forces were in full retreat towards Bilbao, through the town of Guernica, which was attacked on April 26 in one of the most controversial attacks of the Spanish Civil War. Guernica. In Operation Ra-1 Quarter Gen, waves of Ju-52 and T-51 planes bombed and strafed targets in Guernica. The number of casualties is a matter of controversy, with perhaps 300 people killed. The number reported dead by the Basques was 1,654 dead and 889 wounded. Several explanations were put forward by the Nationalists, including blaming the attack on the Republicans, that the attack on the town had been a prolonged offensive, or that the Renteria Bridge, outside Guernica, was the true target. However, the nature of the operation itself, including the formation and armaments used, makes this seem unlikely. Guernica was a clear target of the Condor Legion, rather than the Nationalists as a whole. The offensive on Bilbao, when it eventually came on July 11, was supported by ground units of the Condor Legion, and extensive air operations. It proved the worth of the Condor Legion to the nationalist cause. The first English-language media reports of the destruction in Guernica appeared 2 days later. George Steer, a reporter for The Times, who was covering the Spanish Civil War from inside the country, wrote the first full account of events. Steer's reporting set the tone for much of the subsequent reportage. Steer pointed out the clear German complicity in the action. The evidence of 3 small bomb cases stamped with a German Imperial Eagle made clear that the official German position of neutrality in the Civil War and the signing of a non-intervention pact was a sham. Steer's report was syndicated to the New York Times and then worldwide, generating widespread shock, outrage, and fear. Further campaigns. The Condor Legion also took part in the Battle of Brunete, designed as a Republican offensive to take the pressure off northern Spain, where fighting was ongoing. The Legion was sent from the north to reinforce the broken line. There were repeated raids on Republican armored vehicles and later defensive positions by both bombers and fighters based at Salamanca. Republican aircraft were ineffective, despite nationalist fears, compared with German aircraft. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was shown to be superior to the I-15 and I-16 models used by Republican forces. The Legion lost 8 aircraft, but claimed 18 victories. German tactics were also improved with the experience of Brunete, particularly the en masse use of tanks by the Nationalists. The Nationalists returned to focus on the capture of northern Spain. German test aircraft, with latest models, faced an outdated Basque Air Force, although it did have some Russian planes. Heavy aerial bombardment from 200 Nationalist, German and Italian planes was used far behind Basque lines in August 1937, leading to the fall of Santander after the Battle of Santander on September 1. The formal battle in Asturias ended with the fall of Gijar-Cubden on October 21. A large amount of ammunitions had been used by the Legion, including 1 million machine gun rounds and 2,500 tons of bombs. Germany immediately began to ship industrial production back to Germany. Sperrle argued repeatedly with Vaupell, and against HISMA's monopoly. Vaupell was replaced by Franco, through Sperrle. Sperrle also returned to Germany and was replaced by Helmut Volkmann. Following disagreements with Volkmann, von Richthofen would be replaced with Hermann Plocher in early 1938. Whilst the next major campaign Madrid or Barcelona was discussed, the Condor Legion was moved to Soria and began a week of strikes against Republican airfields, halted by the Republican advance on Teruel and the ensuing Battle of Teruel. Both the Legion's land and air forces were used, and the Legion moved to Braunschweig. Poor weather resulted in few flights, and the town fell to Republican forces on January 6. Up to 100 sorties a day were launched during the Nationalists' counter-offensive through the Alfambra Valley. The Junkers Ju-87A was used for the first time on the advance on Teruel, which was retaken on February 22. The continued Nationalist offensive on Aragon in April-June 1937, including the Battle of Belchite, involved bombing raids and the use of the Legion's ground forces. The Legion was switched to focus in the north, towards the Segre River, before moving south again following Nationalist successes. The Legion moved its main headquarters to Benicarlo. Single-engine planes operated from airfields nearby, and twin-engine planes from Zaragoza. Hitler's words to his colleagues belied a change in attitude about the war in Germany that a quick victory in the war was not desirable, a mere continuation of the war would be preferable. German policy would be to prevent a Republican defeat. However, casualties were beginning to mount for the Legion and, combined with a resurgence in Republican air activity, the Nationalist advance stalled. This was, perhaps, because of the reluctance of commanders in Germany to supply reinforcements, with the Czechoslovakia crisis mounting. Arguments over the bill to the Germans now rising at 10 million Reichsmarks a month continued, unresolved. The Legion's materiel had been exhausted. On July 25, Republican forces launched the last major offensive of the war, the Battle of the Bro. Reconnaissance units of the Condor Legion had noticed a troop build-up, and warned Nationalists' forces. The warning went unheeded. Although the Republic gained ground, Republican forces failed to gain control of Gandesa, with 422 sorties by the Legion having considerable effect. The rest of the battle saw a series of attacks using artillery or airstrikes, followed by a Nationalist ground advance. However, tensions in Czechoslovakia and a shortage of pilots in Germany led to the return of 250 pilots from the Legion, around half of them being bomber crews. Although trained Spaniards made up some of the shortfall, Volkmann complained to Central Command in Berlin, which would lead to his recall in September. During the battle, which saw 113 days of fighting, only 10 aircraft were lost and 14 were badly damaged. The Legion claimed around 100 Republican aircraft, a third of those lost. Only 5 aircrew had been killed, and 6 captured. Aid from Germany temporarily halted in mid-September. Germany and Nationalist Spain settled the issue of German interests and Spanish mines. The Legion took a short break from active duty to receive new aircraft, including Bf-109s, U-111s and JS, and HS-126s, bringing its strength to 96 aircraft, around a fifth of the Nationalists' force as a whole. Von Richthofen returned to Spain in overall command, with Hans Seidemann as Chief of Staff. This reinforcement may have been the single most important intervention by a foreign side in the war, enabling a counterattack after the Battle of the Bro. It mainly took part in operations against the remaining Republican Air Force during January-February 1939, with considerable success. After it took part in parades in Barcelona and elsewhere, and minor duties over Madrid, it was rapidly dissolved. The men returned on May 26. The best aircraft were returned to Germany and the rest of the equipment bought by the new Spanish regime. The Condor Legion claimed to have destroyed 320 Spanish Republican planes using aircraft, and shot down another 52 using anti-aircraft guns. They also claimed to have destroyed 60 ships, including Spanish Republican Navy vessels. They lost 72 aircraft due to hostile action, and another 160 to accidents. Maritime operations The Maritime Reconnaissance Staff 88 was the Condor Legion's maritime unit under the command of Karl-Heinz Wolff. Operating independently of the land-based division, it acted against enemy shipping, ports, coastal communications and occasionally inland targets such as bridges. It used float planes, starting with the Heinkel He-60, which began operating at Cadiz in October 1936. Missions started as reconnaissance but, following the move from Cadiz to Melilla in Spanish Morocco in December 1936, the focus shifted to attacks on shipping. It was again moved in February 1937 to Malaga, newly captured, and then to Majorca when Malaga proved unsuitable. Beginning in June, operations were expanded to allow attacks on all Republican ports, as long as British ships were not present. 10 ships were attacked in the second half of 1937. However, the Norwegian torpedoes being used proved ineffective, and strafing or bombing targets was used instead. The arrival of Martin Harlinghausen saw operations expand, and operations targeted Alicante, Almería, Barcelona and Cartagena. As naval activity declined, inland targets became more numerous, and night missions began. Activities in support of ground forces became the main focus of the unit until the end of hostilities. Both Wolff and Harlinghausen received the Spanish Cross in gold with swords and diamonds. In total, 11 men were killed in action, and 5 others died due to accident or illness. Other operations. Overtly, the Kriegsmarine was partly used to enforce the non-intervention agreement from interfering in the Civil War. However, this agreement was clearly broken by Germany. As a result, the German pocket battleship Deutschland stood guard over Ceuta to prevent interference from Republican ships while Franco transported troops to the Spanish mainland. By mid-October, the German North Sea group around Spain consisted of the pocket battleships Deutschland and Admiral Scheer, the light cruiser K Paragraph LN and 4 torpedo boats. After the Germans claimed that Leipzig had been attacked by an unidentified submarine, it was formally withdrawn from international patrols. Operation Ursula saw a group of German U-boats active around Spain. It began on November 20, 1936, with the movement of the U-33 and U-34 from Wilhelmshaven. Any identification marks were obscured, and the whole mission was kept secret. Difficulties in identifying legitimate targets and concerns about discovery limited their operations. During their return to Wilhelmshaven in December, the Republican submarine C-3 was sunk. The Germans claimed this was due to a torpedo fired from U-34, although the Republicans' inquiry claimed its loss was due to an internal explosion. Their return marked the official end of Operation Ursula. However, it does seem that further submarines were sent in mid-1937, but details of the operation are not known. 6 are believed to have been involved. The German intelligence service, the Abwehr, working independently of the Legion Condor was secretly involved in Operation Bodden. This was to later play a part in the detection of the Operation Torch invasion fleet. Military advantages gained. Training. It is known that the leaders of the army were hesitant about becoming involved in the conflict, and resisted a call made by the Italian government for a dual transfer of ground troops to fight in Spain. The involvement of the Luftwaffe, however, was not entirely restricted, and a commonly held viewpoint is that the involvement of the Luftwaffe in the Civil War constituted a proving ground for troops employed later during World War II. This view is supported by the testimony of Hermann Gar Paragraph Ring, later Reichsmarschall of the Luftwaffe, when on trial at the International Military Tribunal in Nr. 1/4 RNBERG. When asked about the decision to use the Luftwaffe, Gar Paragraph Ring states, When the Civil War broke out in Spain, Franco sent a call for help to Germany and asked for support, particularly in the air. One should not forget that Franco with his troops was stationed in Africa and that he could not get the troops across, as the fleet was in the hands of the Communists, or, as they called themselves at the time, the competent revolutionary government in Spain. The decisive factor was, first of all, to get his troops over to Spain. The far one-quarter thought the matter over. I urged him to give support to Franco under all circumstances, firstly, in order to prevent the further spread of communism in that theater and, secondly, to test my young Luftwaffe at this opportunity in this or that technical respect. This was also a view put forth in Western media following the disengagement of German forces from Spain. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters and Heinkel He 111 medium bombers, and from December 1937, at least 3 Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, first saw active service in the Condor Legion against Soviet-supplied aircraft. The Stuka's first mission flown in Spain was February 1938. Each of these aircraft played a major role during the early years of the Second World War. The Germans also quickly realized that the days of the biplane fighter were finished. The Heinkel He-51 fighter, after suffering many losses during the first 12 months of the conflict, was switched to a ground attack role and later saw service as a trainer. Other units The Condor Legion also included non-aircraft units. Panzer Crews operating Panzerkampfwagen I light tanks were commanded by Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma. The Germans also tested their 88mm heavy anti-aircraft artillery which they used to destroy Republican tanks and fortifications using direct fire, as well as enemy aircraft in their designed role. German involvement in Spain also saw the development of the first air ambulance service for evacuation of wounded combatants. Technical advances One important factor in World War II which is thought to have directly resulted from the conflict is the technical development of the Messerschmitt Bf 109. The V3 V6 types entered service in Spain directly from operational trials around January 1937. In the spring of 1938 these were joined by Type C aircraft with Typers being first fielded in December 1938. As a result of combat in Spain improvements were also made to the 88mm gun. Tactics Alongside the potential for gains in combat experience it is also thought that various strategic initiatives were first trialed as part of Luftwaffe involvement in the conflict. Theories on strategic bombing were first developed by the Luftwaffe with the first exhibition of carpet bombing in the September 1937 Asturias campaign. As the fighting progressed into March 1938 Italian pilots under Field Marshal Hugo Sperrle were involved in 13 raids against Barcelona involving fire and gas bombs. These particular raids resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians. It is worth noting that a subsequent commander of the Legion in Spain, Wolfram Friedrich von Richthofen was to become heavily involved in the operation of the Luftwaffe as part of Operation Barbarossa. Tactics of combined or joint operations were a particular focus. Close air support for nationalist troops, attack bombing of Republican troop concentrations, and strafing became features of the war. The Legion worked closely in missions which maximized the fighting ability of the Nationalist Air Force and troops, the Italian CTV, and pilots from the Aviation Legion area. German air ace Adolf Galland was to claim after World War II that although there was a focus on taking lessons from the conflict in Spain, he believed the wrong conclusions were drawn by the German High Command with particular respect to the Luftwaffe. Whatever may have been the importance of the tests of German arms in the Spanish Civil War from tactical, technical and operational points of view, they did not provide the experience that was needed nor lead to the formulation of sound strategic concepts. Reaction to German involvement Various sympathetic writers participated in condemning the scarcely concealed interference by Germany and Italy. An example was Heinrich Mann, who appealed from exile in France with the slogan "German soldiers. A rogue sends you to Spain." In response to the Legion's involvement, other states tacitly approved the fight of the German Legion against the Soviet-supplied Spanish Republican side. Treatment in Nazi Germany As part of his long-term Blumenkrieg strategy, Hitler drew parallels between the conflict in Spain and the peaceful methods he used to gain control in Germany. The regime also made use of the conflict as an opportunity for political education and aggrandizement. Highlighting of the military aspects and success story for German arms is also evident with the publication of various pulp semi-autobiographical works in 1939, most notably, were Funken Fahr ¼ Franco by Helmut Fahr ¼ Ring, Als Jagdlieder and Spanien by Hans Trotteloft, Das Buch der Spanienflieger by Hauptmann Wolfbly. Each book had a high circulation. In the case of Bly, the circulation was estimated at over 1 million books sold. Although accurate in part, these works are now accepted by scholars on the period and conflict as laced with propaganda which emphasizes daring escapades and fails to address the realities of military combat in general. Since reunification recrimination for the activities of the Condor Legion and shame at the involvement of German citizens in the bombing of Guernica surfaced following German reunification in the 1990s. In 1997, the 60th anniversary of Operation Ra ¼ Gen, then German President Roman Herzog wrote to survivors of the raid apologizing on behalf of the German people and state. Herzog said he wished to extend a hand of friendship and reconciliation on behalf of all German citizens. This sentiment was later ratified by members of the German parliament who went on to legislate in 1998 for the removal of all former Legion members' names from associated German military bases. This process was then carried out, but the issue surfaced again in 2005 following media revelations about the role of pilot Werner Mahr LDERS, who had volunteered to serve in Spain. Although not involved in the bombing of Guernica, it was decided by then German Defense Minister Peter Strzok that in keeping with the law Mahr LDERS name should be removed from the barracks at Visseloheide and from association with Luftwaffe Wing 74 based in Neuburg and Erdenau. Up until 2005 it had not been established that Mahr LDERS flew as a Condor Legion volunteer before his death in 1941. Awards. The Spanien Kreuz Campaign Medal was awarded by the German authorities in 7 classes from April 14, 1939. Due to the clandestine nature of German activities in Spain, no awards were instituted up to April 1939 at the end of German involvement in the conflict. The Spanish Cross complemented CUF titles issued to those who served. Legionnaires could also expect a campaign medal struck by the Spanish authorities to thank German volunteers for their service. See the 2 websites listed below for examples of each medal and others issued to Legion veterans. Other notable incidents on the return of the Legion included an assembly for a personal address by Hitler on June 6, 1939, and a parade as part of the celebrations organized for Hitler's 50th birthday April 20, 1939. Also by way of commemoration, the activities of the Legion were memorialized in a special edition of Der Adler, the Luftwaffe's magazine for service members, which at the time was also circulated in both Spain and the United States. Notable participants, in alphabetical order, Hermann Aldinger, Oskar Daiwanger, Rudolf Demm, Adolf Galland, Hajo Hermann, Werner Mahr LDERS, Hugo Sperrle, Karl Schweikert, Hans Trotteloft, Heinrich Tretner, Wolfram Friedrich von Richthofen, Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, Helmuth Volkmann, Chiang Wei-kuo. See also, Regia Aeronautica and Aviation Legionaria, Vereitzer or Copyright Renacional, Nationalist Air Forces, Aviacia Cube del Tercio, Spanish Foreign Legion, Vereitzer or Copyright Red de la República Española plus or minus OLA, Second Republic Air Force, supported mainly by the Soviet Union. German rearmament, Kampfgeschwader 53, the World War II Luftwaffe bomber wing named for the Expeditionary Force, aerial bombing of cities, Flying Ace, Henschel HS-129. Notes. References. Citations Sources Thomas, Hugh. The Spanish Civil War. London, Aaron Spottiswoode. Westwell, Ian. Condor Legion, the Wehrmacht's Training Ground. Spearhead 15. Ian Allen Publishing. ISBN 978-0-7110-4. 3043-5. External links. Militaria Spanian Crows in its different classes via Wehrmacht-Awards.com, Cuff titles of Legion Condor and Wound Badge via Wehrmacht-Awards.com, Francoist-issued campaign medal via René Chavez's Axis 101 website. Essays Aerial Warfare and the Spanish Civil War by Pamela Feltis at centennialofflight.net, Spanish Civil War, German Condor Legion's Tactical Air Power by Walter Amasiano at thehistorynet.com, Portugal, Spain in Nazi gold. Some details on German reliance on Iberian mineral wealth. Related sites David Nash's exhaustively accurate listing of aircraft which served in the conflict. Axis History, Legion Condor, and Eagles of the Third Reich, Men of the Luftwaffe.